You're listening to There's a Lesson in Here Somewhere, a podcast featuring compelling conversations with exceptional people. Whether it's an inspirational achievement, a hardship overcome, or simply a unique perspective, these are stories we can all learn from. Here are your hosts, Jamie Serino and Carlos Arcila.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is There's a Lesson in Here Somewhere. I'm here today with Minister Tashkovich, and he has quite a story to tell. So thanks for joining us. I'm going to do a very brief introduction of Minister Tashkovich, and I'm going to ask him to sort of complete it because this is a full life. This is a person who has done a lot and does a lot, from being in the government in Macedonia to, as we will hear, helping a homeless couple on the street, taking them off the street. And that'll be the focus of today's story. We'll hear how he worked with two people that were homeless and helped get them off the street. And we'll hear about the hurdles that he had to overcome to do that. So, Minister, I'd like to turn it over to you to complete the background and your introduction, and then we can get into your story.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to see you again and to work with you on this. I have been fortunate to live in, work in, travel to or through 110 countries and territories around the world. I've done this principally because I was part of the team from 84 to 88, which built the internet from Western Europe. Berlin Wall was still up. Through to North America and down to Australia, New Zealand. I also do a lot of work in election monitoring. So I'm on a roster from the State Department, which seconds me to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which monitors elections in sort of Eastern European, Central Asian countries, Caucasus countries, and so on. And I've given lots of lectures around the world, and I also at one point started the Western Union money transfer service for Macedonia and promoted it to the diaspora and traveled all around the world for that. So between all these things, I've traveled a fair amount.
Yeah.
I worked at one point for Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum in Geneva, the famous Davos meetings. I also with my late godfather, we built MTS, Mobile Telesystems, the now today the largest cell phone system in the former Soviet Union. And what else can I say? I don't know. I've worked all over the place, so I can. People approach me and ask me for help when they run out of their own resources, and so I help people almost every day all around the world who have some kind of a problem and they just need to think it through how to solve it.
Yeah, it sounds like it. You're like a Superman of sorts.
or a last resort, as the case may be.
Last resort. Well, tell us a little bit about when you did join the government in Macedonia and some of the work that you did there.
It's actually a funny story. I was I guess it was around July 4th or so, 2006. I was aware that there were parliamentary elections in Macedonia. For people who are listeners who are not familiar with parliamentary democracies, the winner, the president of the party that has the most seats in a newly elected parliament, generally has the right given to him or her from the president of the country to form a government. If that particular party has less than half the number of seats, they have to cobble together a coalition government. We've seen it over the years in places like Bulgaria or Belgium or even Israel. And if they have an outright majority, then they can govern as they please. So my friend Nikole was the president of his party. They'd been in the opposition for the last 4 years. He had the election. I heard he won, so I gave him a quick phone call to say, hey, congratulations. I know you're really busy, but 30 seconds, congratulations, you did it. I told you back in Toronto at our breakfast meeting in 1999 that you get this, and now here you are, good on you. And that was it. It was 30-second call. And then 2 weeks later, I started getting around July 19th or so, I started getting phone calls from people in diaspora all around the world who knew me because of both the Western Union work I did in promoting Macedonia and the connectivity there back in, was it 97 or so? But also, my late father had been co-head of the diaspora. And so they're like, Igor, why are you on the front page of the newspaper today? He said, well, I don't know. I don't read the newspapers. What are you talking about? And there was this picture taken of me in front of a U.S. military tank at a military base, U.S. military base up near Seattle, Washington. Special Forces training I'd gone through with the as a guest of the Secretary of Defense. And so it was there, and then there was this sort of screaming above the fold page one headline that said Tashkovich imminently to be named deputy prime minister in this article. And I was a bit mystified because I'd worked in Macedonia from 92 2002, it was now 2006. And I knew all the journalists, and they knew me, and they knew how to reach me, and my email hadn't changed, and my phone numbers hadn't changed. And I knew that many of them had been through training sponsored by USAID to do proper journalism, Western style, right? Which means that if you're writing a front page article about somebody, you have to at least pretend to contact them, right? You say, we tried to contact Mr. Tashkovich but he wasn't available, or he didn't answer his phone, or whatever, or they did, but they knew how to reach me. And so it was all very strange. And I kind of laughed it off and went off to a dinner with my fraternity brothers, where they made fun of me all night. This article appeared in one or more of 9 newspapers, which cut across different ethnicities and different parts of the political spectrum for the next 3 weeks.
Wow.
And finally, on August 6th, the morning of August 6th, 2006, I get a phone call from Nikole, and he says, Igor, want to talk to you about joining my government. I'm like, really? No blank, Sherlock. I had no idea.
That's funny.
And so then I said, look, what's a salary? And he said, well, I'm sorry, we can't pay a Western salary. You have to take what all the ministers make, and that would be 800 euros a month. I was like, that won't pay the rent for 1 week in New York City. I mean, you have to be better than that. And so we cut a deal where he would cover the fixed costs of my not being here.
Right.
And off I went. Except I'm leaving out one important story, because some of your readers who are involved internationally will wonder about this. The first call after I hung up was not to my mother to say that I'd gotten this fantastic job, but to the State Department, to the legal office, because I knew I needed their blessing as a U.S. citizen to take a job running a foreign country. And in fact, I was number 6 in protocol after the prime minister. There were 4 deputy prime ministers, each representing a different member of the coalition government. And I was first among equals among all the other ministers.
Wow.
What happened? And I had this phone call with this guy, this lawyer. And I explained to him, I said, look, you really should approve this, because I've done so much for the country, and I'll do a great job. I'm really excited about this. And he said, oh, in the most condescending voice possible. He said, oh, Mr. Tashkovich, he said, I'm looking at a piece of paper on my desk, and this piece of paper is entitled Potentially Expatriating Acts. And there are 30 ways you can lose your citizenship.
Oh my God.
And number 1 on that list is taking an oath of office to a foreign country.
Wow.
And I said, yes, sir, I know that. That's why I'm calling you. And I said, if you can see on the wall behind me, you can't in this video, but if you could, talking to the lawyer. I said, you'll see a plaque with an invitation to the opening of the ribbon cutting ceremony of the new embassy and a piece of the red ribbon, because I was the one who cut the ribbon to open up the embassy. I said, that's how connected I was. And for the first couple of years, no report left that embassy without my final review, because the people who came there knew nothing about the country, were deathly afraid of getting it wrong, and trusted my advice as an American citizen. So, you know, and in all these reports, if you go back and look at them from the 90s, they say economic development will bring political stability. So here I am in a position that they figured out they needed, which I can perform, and you should approve it.
Yeah.
And then he goes to me, oh, Mr. Tashkovich, he says, first, you must commit the potentially expatriating act, and then we will decide.
Wow.
And I was like, that sounds like Russian roulette. I don't like those odds very much. Thank you. Goodbye. Click. And I remember calling around. I only had 2 weeks. I remember calling around, trying to figure out how I was going to get this sorted out so I didn't like lose my citizenship. And I got nowhere. I called Schumer's office in the Senate, no dice. They didn't even call back. I called my representative in the House, Carolyn Maloney, but she was the co-chair of the Greek caucus at a time when Macedonia and Greece weren't talking to each other. So there was no chance of getting their help at all. And I called her and no one could help me. I was completely SOL. And finally, the day before, maybe 2 days before I had to go, I remember that Google had just been invented, like just gone public, right? And there was quite a few search engines at the time, you know, things like Netscape and Capricorn and other things. But I was like, all right, let's try this. So I typed loss of nationality, Supreme Court, and clicked go, search, whatever, Google. And son of a gun, there were 10 hits. And the first hit was a Supreme Court case from 1988. And the operative part of the case said, and I quote, absent a declaration of intent by the person committing the expatriating act, comma, the State Department may decide, unquote. So what that meant was, if I declared that I was doing this and did not intend to lose my citizenship, they could not decide otherwise. And so I wrote this airtight paragraph. I had looked over by a white case immigration lawyer. They changed 1 or 2 words. And I flew to Macedonia. I went to the US Embassy. I swore my statement in front of the consular officer, sat through 2 days of confirmation hearings, came back, swore some more documents. And then a couple of weeks later, they sent me letters saying as long as I maintained a residence in America, paid my taxes, voted, you know, normal kind of things that prove that you're functionally an American, they would approve this. And so that's what I did.
And that was that. So I thought you were going to tell me you had to like pay all your unpaid parking tickets or something like that, you know?
No, didn't have a car, so that was easy.
It's so nice not having a car. When I was living in an urban environment, I didn't own a car. So I could dive into this, and there's so much, and I heard some of the story there of the amazing work that you did for that country. And like you said, economic stability brings political stability. So your story there is a great one. But we're going to talk about something else from your life that you did. So we'll quickly kind of just transition into that. So at some point, so when you and I reconnected, you began to tell me about what the work you were doing with a couple that was homeless and living on the street. And not sure where to begin. I'll just maybe throw it over to you to, you know, maybe how did you first run into them and what got that conversation going and what was going through your head? Because, you know, we all pass homeless people and you engaged and, you know, and you have quite a story to tell. So I'll turn it over to you to see like where's the beginning.
Great. The beginning was in 20, this was a sunny day in early 2014, maybe late 20, no, I think probably early 2014. Gets a little fuzzy after a decade. And I came around the corner dressed in sort of a suit and bow tie, wearing a heavy blue overcoat. So maybe it's been on the chilly side, maybe it was in the 40s or 50s or something. But it was sunny out, I remember that. And I'd been to a Cozy, that's a franchise, sort of fresh bread salad soup place here in the Northeast. I'm not sure if it's nationwide or not. I'm basically carrying my lunch. It was midday. And I come around the corner of East 57th Street in Madison. My door to my office building was just 50, 100 feet down the street. It wasn't very far at all. But on that corner, the southeast corner of East 57th and Madison, there was a street homeless couple. And by street homeless, just to define that properly, it's people who don't have a shelter to go to at night. Many people who beg on the streets have a place to go to in the evening and a bed to sleep on. Of whatever condition it might be, but they have one nonetheless. Nikole and Joseph lived on the streets. They slept on the streets. They had no place to go. And you might ask why. And the answer is because although they had a domestic registered partnership, when you live on the streets, it is literally impossible to keep any papers you might have dry, let alone intact. And even I'd given them some kind of gallon-sized hefty Ziploc bags or something like that, and that made them last a little bit longer, but not much longer.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So you regularly saw this couple?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I did.
So
And I didn't engage with them, although I guess at one point, maybe back like in 2013 or something. Whoops, we lost you. There you are. Back in say 2013, I was crossing the street and I looked down on the top of Nikole, who was begging for money, and I saw that she had a terrible skin rash on the back of her neck. And I knew all she needed was some bacitracin would clear it up in a week or something, but she needed to get it, and I knew she couldn't afford it. So I remember buying it for her and giving it to her and explaining to her what it was for and how to use it and how it would help this rash she had in her neck. It was pretty gruesome. And so maybe I'd done one or two things like that earlier on, but we didn't have any sort of ongoing, hi, how are you, have a great day kind of thing.
Right.
So I come around the corner. It's now, maybe 3-6 months later after the bacitracin thing. And it's busy. It's coming up on high noon, so a lot of people are crossing Madison and 57th Street. It's a double-length street. It's very, a lot of people, probably even tens of thousands of people cross there over the course of the day, at least before the pandemic. And Nikole and Joseph were sitting on overturned white corrugated USPS mail sorting boxes just off the intersection. Joseph was listening to a radio. Nikole could never sit for long because of a back injury, so she'd always be jumping up and walking around and stuff like that. But as I came around the corner, she got up off the box, and I should describe her to your listeners. About 5'1", 5'2", maybe.
About what age would you say?
Oh, I can tell you, 37.
Okay.
Reddish hair, curly. And so she came up to me, stopped me in the middle of the street, mid-stride, and took her finger and right up to sort of my mid-chest without actually touching me. And she looked up at me and she said, apropos of nothing, "I don't want your money." She said, "I want your brains." And I was a bit taken aback because, it's kind of a clever pickup line, but I didn't see that in the future. And I didn't really know how to respond. So there was a pause. And then she started telling me about all the indignities she and Joseph had suffered over the many years they'd been on the street. And while she's telling me these stories, for example, what was one of them? She would hope that they would earn $2.34 from begging on the street in order to go to the Duane Reade, which is always a very overpriced pharmacy here in Manhattan, and buy a container of Kraft macaroni and cheese, then go to Starbucks so they could get free hot water and make mac and cheese and eat that. Or how they would go to the dollar store and get these alcohol wipes, and again go back to Starbucks and clean up in the Starbucks bathroom using alcohol wipes every day. And stuff like this. So she and so while she's telling me these stories, I could hear the voice of Doris Buffet in my mind's eye, or mind's ear, I guess, in my mind's ear. Doris Buffet, who passed away in 2020, she was the older sister of Warren Buffett. And I met her in 2004, quite by accident. Story I'll save for another time. And I helped give away her money between 2004 and 2008. And she always reminded me at the end of every phone conversation. She used to call me by my nickname, which is the letter G in double quotes. She'd be like, "Now, G," she says, "don't forget, I give hand-ups, not handouts." Right? She was very important to her. And so here was this woman in front of me, as I later learned, age 37, literally asking for a hand up, specifically not a handout. And I didn't really see how I could turn her down.
And so this was months after you gave her the bacitracin.
Yes.
So you gave her the bacitracin and she didn't question that. You just said, "Here, you better put this on your neck." And she took that. And then you didn't have any exchange.
No.
Months later, she came up.
She remembered me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And probably saw me coming to and fro. I mean, I wasn't in the office every day. I was in the office maybe 1 to 3 times a week. But they were always there. They lived there on the corner. So I took Nikole off to one side because there were lots of people we were like literally right in the middle of the sidewalk, trying to kind of zip by. And I tried to think quickly, what could I ask someone with an 8th grade education? How could Nikole have skin in the game if I were to get her off the street, if I were to help her with her request, right? Because it's got to be a partnership.
Yep.
And I thought quickly and I came up with 2 ideas. And so I said, "Nikole, if you do these 2 things, I'll get anything you need." She said, "Sure, what's that?" And I said, "Number 1, you must never lie to me." And that was important because I was aware that people who were street homeless lied with some regularity. So I said, "If I ever catch you in a lie, we're done. You must never lie to me. There are no second chances." She said, "I can do that." And the second thing I said was, "You must promptly return all text messages or phone calls when I reach out to you." And I thought for someone with education, these are both things easy to comprehend and easy to do.
Okay. And so you and I talked a little bit about this, and I immediately asked, okay, so she had a cell phone.
Yes. So if you look at, if your listeners are in America, if they, how to say, if they look at closely at all the additions on their cell phone bill, there's, I think it's roughly $1 charge. It goes to some kind of universal service fund. And with that money, you're basically subsidizing smartphone usage by people who are homeless, among probably other things, but for sure that.
So a homeless person can go, where would they go? They can get a free cell phone.
Correct. So here in Manhattan, we have something called the Human Resources Administration. and they have HRA job centers, and they're all across the 5 boroughs. And you go to any one of those, usually closest to where you live. And outside of that, there's some guy with a fold-up table giving out cell phones against your HRA picture ID.
Okay. All right. So after you had that sort of, all right, here are your 2 conditions, how did she respond?
She's in full agreement. But subsequently, perhaps later that afternoon, otherwise it was the next day, I kind of kneeled down to speak to Joseph. And he said to me, Mr. G, he said, you're wasting your time. I am 28 years old. My mother died when she was 32. I have no intention of outliving my mother. And I said, come on, Joseph, don't talk like that. You've got your whole life ahead of you. We'll get you back, into being a productive member of society, and you'll go on to do great things. And I tried to encourage him. And he was optimistic by and large for the most part, but he was held back by his development issues.
Okay.
And by that, I mean, well, I think what I have to explain here is that I didn't realize this at the time, but early on, I escorted them to a meeting with a psychologist that was assigned to them by HRA. They had to go. And I was present during the meeting when the psychologist was talking about various and sundry items, nothing particularly, I didn't pick up anything in particular. But when it was over, they waited outside and I went in to see the psychologist. And she said, I have been doing this work for 20 or 30 years, she said. I have never seen a couple more codependent than Nikole and Joseph. And I didn't even know what that meant so much. And I didn't know what she was looking for. I didn't understand it in the context. But fast forward sometime later, perhaps it was 2 years later or so. Let me think of the story was. Joseph and Nikole were coming back to the shelter I'd arranged for them in the Bronx. And they were attacked. It's a dangerous part. Bronx is very dangerous. And there was a big slice on Joseph's arm, a knife. Nikole was very, very good at first aid. She always had a bottle of hydrogen peroxide not far away from her. And she got Joseph all bandaged up.
Wow.
And they went to sleep back in the shelter room. And at 4:30 in the morning, some police officers with their badges obscured knocked on the door and arrested Nikole for a subway jumping infraction from 6 years earlier.
Oh, wow.
Because what happened was, as a result of getting them, quote, into the system and getting them a shelter room, eventually all the computers started whirring and comparing notes and stuff like that. And they realized there was an outstanding warrant for her arrest over a $2 subway.
They were getting into the system.
Right.
So to rewind a little bit, so now you're sort of making this agreement with Nikole. And now in your mind, are you also saying, all right, well, I'm also kind of making this agreement with Joseph, right?
Right.
Right. So, and then she agrees. So then you're like, all right, I'm gonna help these 2 people. I don't know if you had the complete plan in your mind yet, or you were just
no idea.
Yeah,
I mean,
just step by step.
I said, I'm fortunate enough to be well educated with 2 degrees. I said, the system can't be that difficult to figure out. I get that you might not be able to figure out with education, but with 2 college degrees, I would certainly hope I can figure it out and guide them, right?
So what was your first step then?
Oh, getting them shelter, getting them off the streets, right? And they said they'd been to the intake center. It's over on roughly East 30th Street and First Avenue, maybe a little bit east of First Avenue. just north of Bellevue, I think it was. And they'd been turned away 8 or 9 times because they couldn't prove that they had a registered domestic partnership.
Mm.
And it wasn't enough to have an affidavit. It wasn't enough to make a sworn statement. It wasn't enough to,
Yeah.
she didn't have a ring or anything. I mean, according to the rules, unless you can prove that you either married, you have a registered domestic partnership, you were separated and put into, male shelter and female shelter, and they wanted to be together.
So
And much later, as I say,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but their will to want to be together was greater than their need for shelter because they could have,
because they were codependent,
yeah, because they were.
but
So
not because I understood what that meant until much later. I was
yeah,
telling the
yeah,
story.
no, that's really, really powerful. So, and this also goes back to the paperwork thing you were talking about. So if they would have just had paperwork about being married or a domestic partnership, then it would have been fine. It would have been easy.
Right.
So they didn't
So
have that.
then, right. So knowing what they needed, I took Nikole and we took subway downtown and went to City Hall
Mhm.
and found the place that issues the certificates and asked for theirs. And they printed it right up on the printer. Took literally, it was very fast.
Yeah.
Then they said that'll be $15. And she took cash out of her pocket. She said, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't accept cash." And I said, well, she's homeless. She lives on the street. She needs us to get into homeless shelter. How do you do this if you don't accept cash? Oh, we take credit cards. I'm like, well, yeah, but the people who need this don't have credit cards,
Yeah.
right? And if they did, there's no money left in their account years later, right? I mean, so it's not realistic.
Yeah.
And so he directed me to some underground office in some other building a few blocks away that would take her cash, give her a chip, show she paid it, bring the chip back to him, and then she'd get the certificate. But I mean, it requires patience and diligence and follow through and all
Yeah.
that. And when your only concern is what I'm going to eat in several hours, that's a big bridge to cross.
Yeah. I know. That's the thing is that it does sound simple, but yet there are these hurdles, right? But
You can even call them microaggressions if you wanted to.
yeah, yeah. And it's almost like Joseph Heller kind of this labyrinth making you go through this Byzantine kind of structure. Um, but for us, I appreciate that you're saying those things. Like for us, it's like, oh, just go down to City Hall, just do this, just do that. It's tough to put yourself in the mindset of someone who is homeless and maybe someone who maybe if there is a disability there or something. And so, okay, so you accomplished this for them. They had their certificate. So then you were able to bring it back and show them this is a married couple.
Right. And so that maybe that night or the next day, I made a private trip over to the intake center and I said, look, here's a situation. You've turned them away 8 or 9 times. You can't do it this time. We have
Mhm.
all the documents you need. We went through the list. I was like, just do it quickly, please. Show them the system actually works when they follow the rules.
Right.
And the next morning, I said, okay, guys, next morning, this is it. We're going to do it. Also was the morning the Pope visited Manhattan, and he was taking his Popemobile up Madison Avenue, right by where they were, to go into Central Park. And the police, which doesn't have the ability to move people with squatters' rights, even on city streets, asked them very nicely if they move to a different corner so that they could provide security to the Popemobile. And they went down to 56th Street, just a block or so away. And they had been spending the last couple of days kind of sorting through their belongings and figuring out what to take, what not to take, and what to throw away, which is most of it.
Mhm.
And we were ready to go. And I just at that juncture, I saw a brand new London style yellow cab, and I hailed the cab. Pulls up in front of me, and Nikole and Joseph opened up the cab doors and sit inside. The driver is fit to be tied. fit to be tied. And I said to him, don't worry. Number one, I'm paying. Number two, they're clean. And number three, I'm going with them. And so we drove across town to the intake center and went through security and got them. Actually, what they had to, once their documents were vetted, they had to go to Jamaica, Queens, where there was like a 3-week wait period until they got into a shelter room for couples, basically.
Okay. And where was the shelter located?
The shelter room was in the mid Bronx, around West
Okay.
181st Street or so,
Right. And
on Broadway. Again, a dangerous part of the Bronx.
yeah. Okay. So they're waiting out there 3 weeks. They're on the street and you're
No,
interacting with.
no, they were in a temporary shelter room out in
Oh,
Jamaica,
okay.
Queens.
Okay.
They went to
Gotcha.
the back of the street, but then they went up. They were assigned up to the Bronx.
Okay. So, I mean, at that point, that's sort of like it could be the end of the story, right? Like you got this homeless couple off the street, right? And
Right?
it's I guess it's like, well, could that if there were more people like you, then maybe there'd be less homeless people, right? That
Mm-hmm.
if everyone was assigned a homeless person or homeless
Ah,
couple, like go ahead and do these steps and get them off the street, right? So, it's amazing that you did all that and went through all that to get them off the street. Um, but then the story continues.
it does. Uh, so listeners have to keep in mind a couple of things. Number one, the codependency.
Yeah.
Number two, they were both on methadone, which meant that 7 o'clock every morning they had to get methadone.
Yeah.
And number three, their education levels, roughly eighth, maybe early ninth grade. Um, and the fact that now they were in the system, a lot of things in their past were creeping up on them and needed somebody to defend them. Um, and there's just general bureaucratic, let's call it malfeasance, where benefits get cut or dropped for no apparent reason. And when you depend on getting, cash assistance or food assistance in your debit card, on a fixed day every
Yeah.
month, and you
Yeah.
plan on having that money to live on and to eat from and stuff like that, it's a real problem. And so a number of times, I think around 6 or 7 times or so, I had to go to the New York State office of what's it called, fair assistance, fair hearings, something like that. It's a website, and it basically dials back and freezes the situation of the recipient to where they were, and
Okay.
it gives a direct order to the agency that cut their benefits or whatever, and says nope, goes back to where it is, effective immediately, and we're going to have a hearing and talk about this.
Okay.
Hearings were always in Brooklyn, so I made whatever it was, 6, 7 trips to Brooklyn, where I defended them in a hearing.
Okay. As
A
like
week
a character witness kind of thing, or
as a advocate.
okay. Gotcha.
I'm not a lawyer, but advocates.
Now, so just to go back, to sort of address, like to not gloss over this. So these th- two people that had substance abuse issues then.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were on methadone as a result of that.
Correct.
And um and so they were trying to kick their habit, right? And
And they
so
had. I mean, methadone was keeping them sedated. There wasn't any interest in doing drugs, right? They
okay.
started at something like 260 units a day. They were down to 60 when I met them. So they've
Okay.
made significant progress. But the doctors at the clinic were afraid to lower any more until they had a stable housing situation. So that was
Yeah.
really important to
Yep.
give them that so they could lower it more.
Yep. And so do you know, actually we should have probably explored this right in the very beginning. Do you know why they were homeless to begin with?
Yes, in Nikole's case, from the time she was like, what year was that? Early teenage years, let's say 13 or 14. An older sister gave her drugs to try.
Mm,
She got hooked.
mm,
And she did have some mental health issues as well. And her mother tried to commit her a number of times, didn't succeed. And then there was, or maybe she was there for a month or two at a time or whatever, but came home. And then there was an issue with her father dying from potassium overdose.
mm.
And there was the issue of Joseph himself, who the family did not approve of, thought he was a bad influence, and basically said it's either the family or Joseph, take your pick. She
Wow.
had, and so um, she chose Joseph, but she would go to the park across the street from her family home and watch her kids going to and from the school bus every day.
Oh, so she had children.
At that point, she had two. By the time I met her, she had four.
Oh, wow. Okay, so she was a mother.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, so this is the thing with, the issue of homelessness is that it's never simple, right? There's
No, never.
you have all these factors at play. Her childhood experiences, drug use, then the codependence with Joseph. Um, okay. Yeah, so thanks for filling in those details. Okay, and they were trying together to stop using drugs. They were on methadone. And at the point at which you began helping them, they were sort of, maybe you could say, on this upswing of like, we want to improve our lives.
Well, she more than he,
Mm.
but he lived with a perpetual fear that she would get better and he wouldn't, and she would leave him behind.
Mm. Yeah,
So
okay.
there was there was that interaction taking place to the
Yeah.
point where when she was sleeping, he would take her cell phone and send me text messages,
Oh, wow.
right? Trying to convince me that they were good now, they need my help anymore. Thank you very much.
Yeah, wow.
Right. Right.
Wow.
And so it was tied in with the story I was telling before. So why don't I just come back to that?
Yep.
So Joseph had his hand sliced. Nikole patched up. They went to bed. Early in the morning, the police came to arrest Nikole, but there was a scuffle again because they were codependent. And so Joseph fought with the police, whose badges were covered, so he didn't know who was there. Um, all over this $2 fine at 4:30 in the morning. It was just obscenely ridiculous to spend that
Mm.
kind of manpower. Um, and uh, and that evening also, Joseph had messaged me from Nikole's phone saying exactly what I just said before, that, hey, they have a place now, they're happy, they're good, thank you very much, have a good life. And it felt very dismissive, and I was a bit surprised, but I was like, okay, if that's what you want, but I'm disappointed. There's so much more we could do.
Yeah.
And so then around 9:30 in the morning, I get a call from Joseph who tells me what happened the night before, absent the fact that he used his wife's cell phone. And he's very worried about her because, of course, she didn't get her methadone and needed to get that. She's afraid that she'll be in some holding cell,
Yep.
won't have her methadone, which is pretty important to have on a regular basis. And so at one point in the call, he says, my arm is bleeding. I'm like, why is your arm bleeding, Joseph? He says, well, because when they fought with the police officers, the bandage came off and it
Uh,
damaged the wound and it's been bleeding. And I said, for God's sakes, go run it under some cold water. You have a sink, 10 feet ahead of you. He said, no. He said, that's Nikole's job.
oh my God.
Right. And that was when I understood what codependency was.
Sure. Yeah. Wow.
But then I spent 6 hours, felt like 6 hours, maybe it was four. It was many hours, certainly, trying to find Nikole, calling every police station, every holding facility, every courtroom to make sure that they got her methadone, because I was afraid that she would go into withdrawal if she didn't have the
Yep.
methadone. Um, And along the way, I found one of the legal aid services. Maybe it was called legal aid, even I don't remember exactly offhand. In one of the courtrooms that confirmed that her case was in their court, and I explained everything to the person. They said, "No problem, we'll get her off. Just a process." And so they enter the courtroom with Nikole and the officer says, we picked up Nikole for jumping a turnstile 6 years ago and not completing her mandatory um, um, neighborhood,
Yeah, like
hours, whatever they call
community service
that.
for
Thank you.
turnstile jumping.
Community service, exactly right. And the lawyer, made the right statement and got her off. And Nikole was very grateful. She said, "Oh my God, who are you? How did you do this? Thank you so much." And the lawyer said, "Don't thank me, thank Mr. G."
Mm, that's
Because
great.
he wouldn't have been there otherwise. So then she thought I was like on a different plane.
Sure. Well, it's also just amazing when like you hear about these types of stories, because I think people are very like sort of flippant and they don't a lot, there's some people that don't quite understand, they might judge the person for that one specific thing or that one specific moment. But like takes like someone like you jump the turnstile all the time, right?
Never.
Never. Right? But let's just say you did, and then you got caught for it, right? Then your situation would not have ended up like her situation, right? So
Right.
there's like this fragility to their lives because
Absolutely.
one little thing falls out of place and then the whole thing collapses,
Yep.
and it all snowballs. And so I think, when people, kind of roll their eyes or dismiss, a person like her and it's, oh, well, of course, or blah, 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 it all kind of has some background to it, and, so it's amazing you were there and you're always there trying to keep them on track.
Right. Because the social worker in the facility met with them, I think, weekly for half an hour, just going over their case and what they had to accomplish that week or goals they had to accomplish over the 2 years they were allowed to stay there. Right.
Yeah.
And so I worked with them to do that because the social worker had the entire building and he had no time or interest in spending, a minute more than his 40 hours a week. Right.
Right.
So we tried to work on these things, but among them were getting Nikole dentures. She had no
Mm,
teeth. Um, they were kicked out of her mouth overnight when she was sleeping on the subway one winter, and it kind of
God.
door opened up and fell in the crack, kind of thing.
Oh my God.
Um, and uh, and she for security because she was so short. Those old fashioned razor blades her father might have used.
Yeah.
She kept an old fashioned razor blade inside her gums.
Mm,
She could take out and cut somebody with if they ever tried to.
yeah.
Um, but how she kept that blade in there and how she ate food and drank and all that without swallowing it. I mean, it was just incredible. When I saw her, first of all, I didn't realize she didn't have teeth for the longest time. Then I felt guilty for not having noticed, but she'd done such a great job at covering it up. And
Right.
plus, she was shorter than me, so the angle wasn't,
Right.
you know, that I was really, stunned. And then once I realized what the issue was, I tried to find a place to get free dentures. It's very hard.
Yeah.
Now, granted, I was traveling, I had other work and things, and I wasn't there all the time, whatever. But it took me a year to find a
Wow.
place to give her free dentures
Wow.
because all the state and federal programs that were involved with this were either fully booked or they had a 3-year backlog or whatever it was. But I couldn't get any love from various state and federal programs. Finally, I found the adult dental unit at Bellevue Hospital, which would accept the Medicaid that she had to get her
Mm,
free dentures.
wow.
And she did do that.
Yeah. Well, that must have been a game changer for her.
It was, she could smile
Yeah. And chew
totally.
food. Amazing.
To food, right?
So, so Joseph and Nikole were reunited after the court situation. Um, and then what happened?
Oh wow. Well, I was blogging about this on Facebook, and if any of your listeners want to try to locate it, it's hashtag Nikole. It's a fairly unique spelling for Nikole on Facebook. There are one or two other hits, but most of them revolve around my stories of Nikole and what we did, where we went shopping, where we did things, and so on. But among them, what I want to say is that because of this blogging, which they authorized me to do because they wanted people to understand how difficult it was, and they were hoping to be an example of change. A lot of people sent money, and I guess it
wow.
was because they didn't trust people that they met in the street to give them money, but they trusted me. They knew I wasn't going to spend it on vodka, and so they sent me
Yeah.
money, and I received thousands of dollars
Wow.
for their credit, unsolicited. I didn't ask for anything.
Yeah.
But
Wow.
people read the stories and said, "My gosh, I can actually contribute to someone getting better, and I know that Gligor will spend the money wisely."
That's great.
It was really great. It brought tears to my eyes. It was so incredible because it was all unsolicited,
Wow.
and it came from many people, 30, 40 people, something like that. And so when they got the shelter room, I was able to take them to a place on 125th Street, and get them, pillows and pillowcases and sheets and blankets and, all fresh stuff, some clothing, whatever. Now, they were very resourceful getting clothing that fit them, but they were worthy of a few new pieces too. So
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so people can read the blog on your Facebook page. Is that what you said?
yeah, if you're on Facebook, hashtag Nikole. The other places, there's a medium.com account for, kind of long, All Together in Dignity Fourth World Movement, ATD Fourth World. And then they could search there as well.
Okay. Yeah, and then what I could do is I could put that stuff into the show notes for this.
Yeah, great. I think I sent them to you earlier in our chat.
Yeah. Yeah, so we can link to that. So through all this, do you have any thoughts? Like, I also want to really give you credit because you've in your life solved big, huge problems, like big picture problems, right? Like being a minister in the government, you're solving problems for millions of people, but then you dove down deep to solve a problem for two people,
Right.
right? And that's really amazing that, just sort of the difference between that and, the way your mind works. I give you a lot of credit for that. So,
Could I segue there for a moment?
of course, yeah.
I'd like to tell one story about the time in Macedonia, which is sort of good example of what you were describing. So I was in it was actually before I was even confirmed, in the week before I was confirmed as minister by Parliament. This man knocks on my door. It was a temporary office I was using in the party headquarters. I was not a member of the party. I was a technocrat. I thought that was very important in order to get the work done that I needed to do, to have both sides supporting me, not just one side, right? Because it was like very divisive, like we see today in our country here in America. And he says to me, "My name is Professor Vlako Chingovsky. I am going to become the head of LM, which is a state-owned electrical generation facility, mostly with coal, but also some waterworks and stuff." And he said, "You have a big problem, Mr. Minister." I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, you can't attract new businesses to Macedonia, set up shop here, assembly lines, factories, whatever, if we can't keep the lights on." And I was like, "You're right." And so that began a 3-hour unscheduled meeting for how we were going to solve this problem, which I very much took in mind. And shortly after I started, maybe see, it was August, September, October, or September, maybe October actually, October of 2006. A man comes to my office. He was a senior advisor to the chairman of a engineering firm, had maybe 30 some odd facilities across the country. It did different types of engineering, but this one in Kichevo in the mountains in Western Macedonia was specifically tasked with making the high voltage line bars, the stands that the wires ran on above ground, right? And he said, Mr. Minister, you're the only person who can help us. And I said, that's quite an opening sentence. Why am I the only person who can help you? And he said, because you're a technocrat and everyone else takes sides. It's like, okay, tell me more. He said, well, we have this factory. We have to produce these high voltage poles, right? Because we need electricity, as you know, in this country very badly. It was still on. It wasn't. We weren't having outages, but that was going to happen in 2008. It's now a year and a half away, but it was definitely going to happen as electricity use continued to increase. And he said, ever since the election, the people from the two political parties are fighting on work time in the factory, fist fights,
Oh my God.
ambulances,
Oh, wow.
coming, hospital visits. They're not getting any work done. It's really a problem. I need you to come and talk to them. So Kichevo is like an hour, maybe hour and a half away from Skopje. Ministers are usually very busy. They don't travel that far away from the capital. But I agreed to go. And we were one morning and we were traveling up the mountain road, and it's very steep. You're going over these mountain roads. And we got to the factory. And there was a TV camera that came with us as well. And when the announcement was made that the minister was here to visit the factory, everything calmed down very quickly. And we spent a few hours talking, both sides, back and forth. It was all on camera. And I said, and I was mediating, right? And I said, look, guys, here's they were all guys, right? I said, here's really the issue. I said, when you go home at night, right? You turn on the light switch, your wife's made you dinner, maybe you turn on TV, see the news, maybe you turn on the radio, but you turn it on, you expect the lights to go on, you expect the power to turn on, you expect to be able to see the image on your screen. This is, before most people had cell phones. And you don't think twice about how that happens.
Yeah.
But you have a mission critical task here because this country is going to be short of electricity within a year. And every high voltage pole that you make is critical to solving that problem and anticipating it. And so I'd really appreciate it if you're looking for jobs for your relatives, for your friends, your neighbors, if you kind of put this to one side and get the job done, because without it, we're going to be in a much worse position than we are today.
Yeah.
And that was really compelling to them. And I'm proud to say they never fought again, and they got the job done.
That's great.
Building this high voltage power line to Bulgaria.
Yeah, that's great. And that's, that uniting them under that mission, got them to put the differences aside. Also, reminding people how important their jobs are, is key, I think, to leadership. So that's a great story. So knowing, your experience, having had this experience, like what are your thoughts just on homelessness and the problem of homelessness? Obviously a massive question, but you have such a unique perspective on it, having gone through what you went through and helped the way you did. What's your perspective on it? And as much as, you could sort of summarize that, and it's not to point fingers or blame anyone or whatever, but like, what are your thoughts on the issue of homelessness in America?
Well, I mean, it's an extremely difficult task, right? Because I now understand that the secret to solving this problem is providing housing in some way, shape, or form. And once you have a stable place you can live, then everything else stems from there. And after Joseph died, I was able to get Nikole into a shared apartment, 2 bedroom, 1 bath, with another woman who had mental illness issues, but she was high functioning as well. And from there, Nikole found herself a part-time job, and I helped her get a volunteer position. And she was actually literally making money that she'd have to pay taxes on.
Wow.
And that was a huge success in my book.
Yeah. Well, so we didn't talk about, so Joseph passed away. And so of course then in some ways then that codependency, so Nikole was able to kind of move on from that.
Not really. It was very, 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 very tough for her.
I can imagine.
She spoke often of taking her own life. Uh, but we would meet Sunday afternoons for 2 or 3 hours. I helped her discover green tea, and she loved the feeling it had in her brain. It really woke her up and got her to engage and stuff like that. And so we would speak and talk about the week past and what she needed to do and how to get things done and where to go and how to ask for things and stuff like that. So I was really providing, extensive counseling services face to face on Sunday, Saturday, usually Saturday or Sunday afternoons, and then we were in touch at least once a day, if not twice a day or more, by text or phone call. And in fact, after Joseph died, she called me early every morning when she went to get her method. I'm up early, so it was around 7 a.m. or so. And she'd say, "Hi, Mr. G, it's Nikole. Have a great day." It was a very fast call. And it used to annoy me at first because I didn't know why she was doing it. But much later I understood it was an acclamation,
Affirmation.
an affirmation of life call. Thank you. An
Yeah.
affirmation of life call, saying, "I'm alive today. It's going to be a great day."
Yeah.
You to have one too. So she took every day very seriously.
Yeah. Well, she probably also just in a way felt it was like a gift. So how did Joseph die?
So as years went on, Joseph was, became 31, and remembering what he had said when I first met him, that his mother died at the age of 32 and he didn't want to live past that. His birthday was March 2nd or March 3rd. And he, in that, let's say 5 months beforehand, he deliberately went downhill. He would sell money off the monthly credit, not credit card, but the monthly credits that he got from the government to people who would sell him drugs. So he'd take the drugs in exchange for buying food for them, right? He'd beg, borrow, steal other money to take more drugs. But I forgot to mention. So actually, but as part of his grand plan, he got himself kicked off the methadone program. And I remember going 8:30 a.m. or 8 a.m. one morning. We went down to an appeal program down by Beth Israel Hospital down near Union Square. And I remember the lady who was the manager, she was in charge. She was no one's fool, really tough, but she was also very heavy. And at one point, Joseph said to her, "You're really fat. Have you thought about losing weight?" And I'm like, "Joseph, that's really self-defeating."
Yeah.
You might want to apologize, because I was in the room. I was mortified. And
Self-defeating.
right. And so, of course, he did not win his appeal. And they have a protocol for scaling people off methadone very quickly. I don't think it's that healthy, but for whatever reason, it's approved. And so by that within some period thereafter, between the lack of the methadone and his desire to kill himself by the time he was 32, he started taking drugs and drinking alcohol without limit,
Mm.
vodka, cheap vodka usually. And the situation got worse and worse. So much so that Nikole asked me to give him some of the cash that I was keeping as a bank in my
Yeah.
office filing cabinet drawer. And I asked her, I talked it through with her. I went through why this shouldn't happen. I said, it's your money. You're the one who basically made it and raised it, whether it was from mistreat or from your job or whatever. And I've always made you sign paperwork when you wanted to take it out so that there was a clear record
Yeah.
of it and so on. But she insisted. And so one day I remember meeting Joseph with a lot of money, maybe it was $400 or something, in cash. And he met me at my subway stop, and I passed it through him through the bars
Mm.
on the other side of the thing. And he took it off. He went, but his eyes were bloodshot. He was haggard and gone. And he was killing himself. There was no question about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Was Nikole using then? Because he was?
no, no,
Wow. All right.
she was really determined to get her life. There was some alcohol use here and there, right? And over the course of nearly 4 years, I probably took them to alcohol detox 5 times or so,
Oh, wow. Okay.
right?
Yeah.
It's typically a 3 to 5 day program. It works really well until you backslide,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
But they would be clean for weeks after coming off that program.
yeah.
The problem, of course, is there's not enough alcohol detox beds in Manhattan. I doubt the situation has changed in the last 6 years, and it's hard to get a room, get a bed.
Yeah.
You can show up, wait outside the door, and wait until noon, and then be turned away and have to do it all over again the next day.
Wow.
There are no appointments. There's no website you can check. It's all
Yeah.
show up. You show up
Wait.
and you wait and you hope that a bed becomes available.
Wow. Yeah. And this so again, like the tying together there of the homeless issue with addiction, um, and the strength of that addiction. I mean, with recovery, there is usually relapse. And then, like what people will say is ask anyone that smokes cigarettes how many times it took to quit smoking cigarettes. And that can
Sure.
help you understand, other types of addiction. But yeah, he couldn't, in the end, he couldn't kind of get away from it.
But he
Uh,
didn't want to. He didn't want to. He literally wanted to kill himself before he turned 32, and he was
yeah.
succeeding. And finally, around Valentine's Day, February 14th, year was that 2017. Nikole called me in a panic one morning that Joseph was bleeding through all his orifices.
Oh my God.
That happens, for people who don't know, when the liver stops functioning because the liver creates clotting factor, which keeps your blood inside your body.
Mm.
Absent clotting factor, every opening is a source of blood loss.
Wow.
So pretty gross, right? So she called the ambulance. I told her to take him to a certain hospital because I want him to make sure he got good medical care. The hospitals in the Bronx have varying medical care and standards. And for whatever reason, she wasn't successful, and the ambulance took him to North Bronx Central Hospital, something like that. And so I raced up there on the subway, way up on the border of Westchester County, and got him, with the nurse's help, to sign a healthcare proxy naming me and Nikole as healthcare proxies. Somehow his father was informed, who he had been somewhat estranged from. He was already there by the time I got there. And he insisted on being made the third healthcare proxy, but we didn't really do much about that. And during and so after that, he was placed into a medically induced coma in the ICU in a separate isolation ward. So you had to go into the ICU, identify herself to be, registered, then scrub up and go into a separate room, had cameras
Yeah.
on, right? And so he was in medically induced coma. That was to say that Valentine's Day. Yeah, for like, a little over 2 weeks. And after about, and I remember going in to see a social worker, a nice man from Nigeria who was very religious. And I said, he doesn't intend to live past 32. He turns 32 in, 17 days from now or so. And I think we need to talk about what happens after this. So
Mm.
he said, no, let the doctors do their thing. We can talk about that later if it comes to that, but let's remain optimistic. He said. And but that was his religion speaking. I recognize that. And I said, okay. But I put in place a plan B with a funeral home that took care of indigent customers, so that I had that in case I needed it.
Yep.
And I spoke every day to the ICU, who reported that ultimately that they had tried 2 different forms of, or maybe even 3, of antibiotics, but they weren't working. There was no change in his condition, and he was still in a coma. And I said, from my research of the 5 antibiotics you could be using to fix liver failure, I actually think the 2 you haven't tried are the ones that have the highest degree of success. So why don't you try those?
Mm.
And they agreed, and they started to work.
Wow.
They were overjoyed. The doctors and nurses were overjoyed. He was getting stronger every day, and they thought that they could take him out of the coma.
Mm.
All his vitals were getting stronger. Things were healing. It was really a miracle. His birthday came and went. I think it was March 2nd. Still in a coma. I think that was a Thursday. And on March 4th, I got this call from Nikole screaming to the phone that Joseph had died. She was at the hospital. And so I raced up there to take care of things. And Joseph's brother and brother's girlfriend was also there. Joseph's brother was in even a worse mess than Joseph was. It was a miracle
Wow.
he was still alive. Don't quite know how he did it, but perhaps, think of a cockroach. I mean, the man had there was no redeeming character for this man whatsoever.
Wow.
And it took me a long time to figure out that what must have happened. Oh, I know. Wait. So we didn't know how Joseph died, and it didn't make sense. I couldn't figure it out, right? And uh finally, and I had another problem too, right? Nikole was in a couple shelter, and you could be absent from a couple shelter for up to 1 month before losing your shelter room to someone waiting, for example, in Jamaica, Queens, for a room to
Yeah.
open up,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And so I said to Nikole, I said, under no circumstances can you let on Joseph has died. You have to use the rest of this month you have available to you to figure out what we're going to do and how you're going to survive, because otherwise you'll lose room immediately.
Yeah.
And you'll have to go through the process all over again because they don't have a way of just moving you into female housing.
Right. Right.
And there's a whole separate intake system for this, right? And so she kept up the charade for a bit. And so I'll just stop that story for a moment and come back to Joseph. So after like a week, 5 days, something, the nursing home picks up Joseph on East 80 to brings him to East 87th Street that Friday. The next day, I go with with Nikole to sign the paperwork. She has to sign it. She's the next of kin, but I read everything through to make sure it's all safe to sign. And we figure out what we're going to do. She decided to cremate him, and we try to figure out, what to do. I get a call on Monday morning. Since it's now, we signed paperwork on Friday, Saturday, Sunday goes by. Monday morning, left 9 o'clock in the morning. I get a call from Marie Munchinsky. Marie was the director of the funeral home, super nice lady, super competent. extraordinary experience, been doing this for like 30 years. And she says to me, Mr. G, she said, I have bad news. And I'm like, bad news? What, what
Yeah.
does that mean
Yeah.
when the funeral home director calls you over after a weekend and says you have bad news? I said, order my options. I said, he got up and walked out.
Yeah.
There was a fire. You lost electricity. Uh, I'm confused. I don't know what you're going to say next.
Yeah.
And she said to me, well, in order to get permission to do a cremation, a whole bunch of city agencies have to sign off on our request electronically.
Huh.
And one of them was the medical examiner, who had, thanks to the network available through the Health and Hospitals Corporation here in New York City, was able, from the comfort of their office, to look at his urinalysis and blood work that was done because he'd been in a coma.
Right.
Everything was all wired up.
Yeah.
He wasn't moving, right? But all the stuff was measured on a daily basis, or maybe twice
Yeah.
daily, for all I know. And she said to me, they refused to sign off on the cremation request because there's a high dosage of cocaine in his urine.
Whoa.
And I said, that's not possible. He was comatose. What are you
Yeah.
talking about? Right. And so she said, well, they've just taken away his body to do an autopsy.
Wow.
And I said, let me get this straight. The city cares about him more dead than alive, because that's a pretty expensive process.
Hmm.
And she was
Oh,
like,
instigating a
I have,
potential crime.
right. And so anyway, they didn't take action, but it was clear that there was only one person who could have done it. And that was his brother, who was keeping his younger brother's death wish.
Wow. Yeah, this that took a turn, man. So one thing I thought to ask, like you hadn't talked too much about the family until that point, and I'm wondering, like, over the 4-year period, had you had interaction with either Nicole's or Joseph's family? Just thought to ask this now.
Um, Only Joseph's father when we signed the healthcare proxy, and then I met with him twice after Joseph died to give him paperwork and pictures
Okay,
and
but
stuff like that.
previously, over the whole 4 years, though, with
Zero
Nicole's
with
family,
zero
Joseph's.
with Joseph's family.
Okay.
With Nicole's family, I was able to arrange um, a rendezvous with her two youngest sons. I think they might have been twins. I don't remember now. But her two youngest sons, and they had a very awkward meeting on East 96th Street in Lexington with the husband, uh, um,
The
for
the
like,
father, the father of the children.
right,
Okay,
was
so
like
he
for
he
like
had custody of the children.
right for like 10 minutes or something like that. And we took a few
Okay.
photographs, and that was it. But at least she got to see them and hug them.
Interesting.
But for them, it was very traumatizing, you can imagine.
Yeah, yeah, I could imagine.
They were like, 10, 12 years old or something like that.
Yeah. So, all right. So
And
then,
then in the few months before she died, I was able to reconnect her with her firstborn child, her oldest son, um, who was living in Queens. And they had a number of, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 meetings
wow.
over
Okay.
coffee to just sort of ask questions.
How old was he?
Mm,
Roughly.
24, 25.
Okay. Interesting.
Um, he's an accountant now living in Ohio.
Okay.
And then the daughter was up at Union College in Schenectady. She was a senior. Um, and I was trying to set up something called Miracle Messages. It's run by a friend of mine, which helps the street homeless reconnect with family through an
Wow.
intermediary. It's a great program. If any of your listeners are looking for something to support, Miracle Messages is a wonderful program that helps connect street homeless with family in hopes that they can, bring them in, basically.
Wow. Yeah, that's amazing.
But
So,
Nikole was impatient, and she texted her daughter directly, and that didn't go well. They never saw each other.
uh, so, all right. So there was never any action taken about Joseph, even though there was cocaine in his system.
Correct.
And all right. And you didn't push. I mean, you just,
I could have, filed some kind of a lawsuit on behalf of the estate or
yeah,
something, I suppose. I'm not sure what standing I would have had. I mean, I guess I could have proven the standing. I'm not really sure.
yeah,
It was tempting to do that, to win some kind of a settlement that might be used to improve the street homeless
yeah.
patent. I didn't pursue it.
Yeah. Um,
And maybe I even know statute of limitations. Maybe there are none. Maybe I could do it tomorrow. But the point is that they had cameras on the guy. It's obvious that they could have figured out who did it.
right, right. Man, that is amazing. So then switching back over to Nikole, so you said when she died, so um how did that happen?
That was really heavy. I had been away on a trip. It was like April 3rd, 2018. Nikole called me that morning, and she was just full of beans, just so full of life, so excited. And she wanted to give me something I needed, some piece of paper I wanted, or something. I don't remember what it was, but she came to my apartment complex. I was warned early on never let her into my apartment, so we never did. We always met upstairs, but that particular day I met her at on the 27th floor at my elevator bank. And the door opened up, and she looked like $1,000,000. Unbelievable, pulled together, full of life, joyous, happy, in a way I'd never seen her before.
Hmm,
And she explained that a psychologist adjusted her medications, and she was feeling terrific,
great.
optimist, everything. Um, and that was the last time I saw her alive.
Ah,
And later on, we kind of pieced together what happened. Again, it's a much longer story. I'm shortening it for the sake of the show. But basically, she had always had a sense of wariness and caution previously, and this medication took that away.
hmm,
And she befriended two street homeless men who were living on the street near where she had her apartment. And that must have been, a cold, late March, early April morning. And she took them inside so they wouldn't freeze to death outside.
hmm,
And this went on for a couple of nights, much to the chagrin of the roommate, who then had to leave for some kind of surgery on her foot. So Nikole was alone with these men. And P.S. Long story, they killed her
oh,
and stole the TV and whatever.
horrible.
But it was because of the medication changed.
Yeah. So she wasn't her usual self. And
Right. She wasn't suspicious. She wasn't worried.
yeah,
She wasn't cautious. She said she only felt guilty that she had this warm, heated apartment and these guys
yeah,
are outside in the cold.
that's terrible. Sorry to hear that. So,
So the way I found out was going back to what I said earlier, she called me every morning. And that Sunday morning, it was a beautiful April morning, absolutely picture perfect, gorgeous blue sky, a few clouds floating around. And the call didn't come. And I thought, oh, well, maybe she went to the laundromat. I made all kinds of excuses for why the call didn't come. And then I forgot about it because I was busy. And around 4 or 5 o'clock, um, someone I reached out to earlier said, have you heard from Nikole yet? I said, no, I haven't. Then I tried again. And I started to get worried, but there's nothing I could really do because the person assigned to her from the sheltering agency didn't work weekends. And I wanted to, have the police do a welfare check, but that would have involved breaking down the door, and it wasn't my apartment nor hers. She was, basically it was a loaner apartment, so to speak. And I didn't feel I could take that step. And I said, if she's dead, nothing's going to change if we wait till Monday, but it's going to be a long way to wait.
Yeah.
But I got the guy on the phone first thing Monday morning. He wouldn't have normally gone up. Their offices were down by Battery Park. He wouldn't have gone up to the Mid Bronx until the afternoon or evening to see his clients. I said, you have to go up right away. And he found her.
Mm.
So that was about 12:30 in the afternoon.
Yeah, so it's a sad ending to, this sort of beautiful deed that you did. And it doesn't have this sort of like tie a bow on it, picture perfect ending,
No, and I should just add for your listenership, she had gotten, because of stable housing, which she'd been in now for, how long has she been in there? Maybe, I guess it was July. So from July to April. Um, she had gotten her methadone reduced. She was actually down to 2 units a day,
Mm,
which was low enough for them to trust her to take home several days a supply at a time.
mm.
And the day she was found, she was scheduled to get off methadone completely,
Wow.
to get the doctor's signature.
Yeah.
And that same day, or maybe the next day, she was scheduled to start taking private classes to get her GED.
Oh, wow. Yeah, so she was really trying to keep on track. It's a shame.
Yeah. But I was able, with the help of my friend Margot, to get the Archbishop of St. Patrick's Cathedral to do a service for her in the north part of the cathedral.
Mm.
And when I advertised it on Facebook, 70 of my friends showed up.
Wow.
There are so many people who are so vested in her success
Yeah.
that they took out time from their day at lunchtime to come to her memorial service.
Yeah, that's really sweet. Well, I mean, you certainly improved, you know, years of her life. Um, you know, and of course, I won't ask like, was it all worth it or whatnot, but like, what, how
It
do
was
you
definitely
feel?
worth it.
Yeah.
It
How
was
do you
definitely,
feel about like, in the end, how do you feel about what you did? Even though the ending, wasn't what we would want it to be, how do you feel about it?
well, I know that she'd never been happier in her life than
Yeah.
having someone to help guide her to get things done to
Hmm.
allow her to re-enter society. Um, so I had her thanks every day we met.
Yeah.
Um, but it was a tough road. It was a tough road.
Yeah.
I found myself intellectually challenged on many occasions.
Mm.
And I said to myself, there has to be a solution. But for God's sakes, if I can't figure it out with 2 Ivy League degrees, how on earth do people with eighth grade educations figure this out?
Yeah.
And the answer is they don't. They don't.
Yeah.
And so at one point, while she was still alive, I got a meeting with an assistant commissioner in charge of homeless activities. There's more than one. Um, and went through a long laundry list of changes they needed to make to their system to make it accessible
Yeah.
to people.
And what are we, I don't think we have time to go through all that, but what are one or two things there that you talked about with
Oh, I
him?
don't remember. I'd have to get back to you on that. Sorry, I
Okay.
don't have it
No,
memorized all these years
that's
later.
yeah, that's all good. Because it just goes back to my question, I asked earlier, like a person with your perspective and your experiences now, you probably have quite a lot to say about what we could do to improve the situation. Because I mean, it's terribly complex. I mean, it's a problem that's been going on for centuries. It's and no one has figured it out. I mean, well, maybe I should ask you, do you see a country out there that maybe has it figured out better than we do?
Oh, I think so, for sure. The richer countries, Norway, Sweden, probably Switzerland, if I had to guess,
Yeah,
off the top of my head.
yeah,
But they're socialist, right? I mean, there is a difference.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a complex problem.
They're social democrats, let me not.
All right, well, is there anything else that you'd want to add, about the story or about, your participation, your decisions about homelessness?
Well, only that, again, that they had authorized, Nikole and Joseph both authorized me to share their story far and wide. Um, and in doing so, I'm making slow progress towards a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but we have a treatment prepared and we have to get a script together and we have to get financing together and all this. Certainly, if any of your listeners are interested, guarantee there are a lot more twists and turns than you've heard today.
Yeah.
Um, and we think it would be very compelling, actually,
It
to
is. It
tell
is a
the
compelling
story.
story, and
Um,
there's so much to learn in all the twists and turns. That's for sure.
mm, uh, so there's that. Uh, and also, I think what people on the street really want is someone to listen.
Yeah,
And even if you can't help, bend down on your knee and listen to them for 5 or 10 minutes. And if you can buy them a meal from a local place, do that too.
yeah, yeah. All right,
Because
Minister.
I guess I would, so just to end, so just to clarify or to restate, when you're street homeless, all you care about is the next meal. You're not
Yeah,
writing resumes. You're not getting figuring out where you can get a business suit from. You're not applying for jobs. You only care about what happens the next couple of hours. Your world shrinks
right,
incredibly
right. The idea of short and medium term and long term goals. I think
out the window.
that's another thing that people have to remember. When everyone just says, "Oh, just do this or just do that," and it's like you said, their world has to shrink. You're just looking for your next meal or where you're gonna go if it rains or something. And um, yeah, it's there's definitely a perspective there that everyone has
Mm-hmm.
to just keep in mind.
Mm.
So, all right, Minister, it was wonderful to talk to you again. Um, it's a powerful story, and I appreciate that you shared it with us. I appreciate what you did, and I appreciate everything that you shared with us. And everybody, thanks for listening or watching, and we'll see you next time. So, Minister, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for helping to keep alive their memory. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.